All right, morning. How's everybody doing today? It's Friday. Always makes me happy. That means the Tamster and I are going to go hang out, and it's going to be a great weekend. And I'm just looking forward to everything going on. We've got a baptism coming up. It's kind of exciting. I love baptism. I love just seeing people come to Christ. And so we've had a friend, older. Like when I say older, I mean just not a kid. Got saved about 3 weeks ago, and so we're going to be doing baptism Sunday, and I'm excited about it. To do that during kind of this COVID thing is pretty exciting. I believe it's first fruits of what God's doing in the ministry that we're laying down at Restoration Gathering, and I talk very little about that. I really kind of like to see myself as a pastor to whoever was willing to listen to me ramble, but at any rate, it's going to be a great weekend, and I can't wait to just get involved and see what happens. I love my freedom of time during the weekends, and so that's what we're doing. My prayer is that at some point you can pray with me about that. I really want to be back in ministry in a full-time way. As much as I love what I do at the Stone Company, I really want to be free to do the things that God's called me to do. But hey, it's another story. This is where I am. This is my life, and so. Excited about that. So let's jump into to the book. We're in Philippians chapter 1, verse 12 through 14. I keep thinking we're going to go faster, but it never works out that way. So we're the whole theme, and you remember, and I'm not going to rehash it today, but the whole theme is about joy. The whole book. Paul is in prison, and I'm going to remind you of that in a minute. Before we jump into that, and he kind of responds to how he finds joy in the midst of that. And it really relates to you and me. I got a question for you. What steals your joy? What is it? What does it take to steal your joy? Just let that sink in. What does it take? What does it take to steal your joy? It's a real true question, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this. Every time when Tammy and I have been in ministry and we'd go through hard times, she has been very faithful to look at me and say, "But they can't steal our joy." And I'm grateful for that constant reminder of Tammy to remind me of that, because ministry is terrible in so many ways as far as it relates to pain and things that happen in church. But let me just remind you some things the scripture says. Paul says, rejoice always. And again, I say rejoice, right? James says, consider it pure joy, my brethren, when you encounter these various trials of life that come your way. Paul tells the Galatian church, if you keep in step with the Spirit, the fruit of that is joy, right? Love, joy, peace. The fruit of that is joy. So it's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. The psalmist says, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And so I'm going to ask you again, let's listen to those. And he says, what does it take to steal? I'm asking the question, what does it take to steal your joy? And here's what I've discovered. No person can steal your joy. They can't. No person can steal your joy. No circumstance can steal your joy. Two things, maybe three, but I'm going to leave you with two. Two things that can create loss of joy, steal our joy. One is my mind's perspective, right? As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. If I see my circumstances and I think wrongly about them, my mind has created a scenario where I can throw my joy away. Nobody stole it. I gave it away. I just said, I laid it down and picked up pity instead, or picked up whatever else it is. But my mind, which affects the attitude of my heart, right? That's what happens. That can create loss of joy. That's why the Lord has to be always the focus. It's always on him. And then the second thing is that sin, when it's allowed to linger in my life, will steal my joy. Sin has an eroding effect, just like a cancer in the body. You let that cancer linger in your body, it will just continue to erode things. It doesn't just go, hey, I'm going to be calm right now and leave you alone. No, it's always chipping away. That's what sin does. You let sin linger, it will chip away at everything else. And the number one thing it will take is your joy. So, hey, that was all free for today. Before we even jump into the scriptures, I want us to just understand that, because here's Paul, and we're going to see that he has great reason in the midst of everything going on to feel like his joy I mean, that you would go, hey, he shouldn't be joyful in this, but he is. And so before we jump into verse 12, 15, let me kind of set the stage again. Paul's in prison. He is in Rome, chained to royal guards. He's not in the penitentiary, so to speak, of which they did have, because he wasn't a violent criminal. He's a political criminal. They are scared to death of him, but they want, for their safety and for his, to keep him separate from the common prisoners that are there. So he's got, and it's a kind of a royal thing. The Praetorian Guard were the royal guard of Caesar and of the nation of Rome. It would be much like our Secret Service, maybe. Maybe you could think of it as, that's probably the best way to describe it, Secret Service. They were just those guards. We don't really have a Praetorian Guard like so many other nations do, but the Secret Service is close enough to that. Every 6 hours, he got a new one. Sometimes there were two, but every 6 hours, he got a new one. Come in. One guy would unchain himself, the other one chained himself to him, and there it'd be. And that's the way it was. And so he's living in a rented house. And I think as we study Scripture, we see that he was paying for that rented house. And so he sits there. Now, Nero hasn't decided, the Caesar, Nero hadn't decided after hearing Paul's testimony whether he wants to behead him or not. The crucifixion wasn't an option for Paul because he was a Roman citizen. So beheading was. And so Nero is still trying to figure that whole thing out. Now, so in all reality, Paul is sitting in a house with no privacy. There's always somebody at his side, whether he's trying to bathe himself, whether he's trying to relieve himself, no matter what's going on, he has no privacy. He has no possessions other than kind of the meager things that you might have that people have brought him, a gift or two of something, but he has no possessions to speak of. He has no true freedom. He's not free to just get up and go do things, and he has no power, right? He can't command anything. He's just there. In all of this, he sees joyfulness. He sees his troubles as advancing the gospel. Listen to what he says. Now, I want you to know, verse 12. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. Just to back up, you remember, they sent the Philippian church, whom Paul had the privilege of kind of birthing, is now 10 years old, solid in the faith. They hear that Paul's in prison and know what's going on, so they send Epaphroditus. He comes, gives them a gift. They brought him money or whatever else, food maybe. Epaphroditus got sick. He's on his way back. Paul wants to write him a letter. So they sent Epaphroditus to find out how Paul was doing and what was going on. So this is Paul's response. And so he's saying, hey, I'm writing to you. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. All my trials, all my trouble has actually advanced the gospel. He's getting excited about that reality. So as I thought about that, I thought about a couple of things. One, John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. He was a pastor, pretty good communicator. People were coming to Christ. They were hearing truth. At that time, it upset the world, and so they put him in prison. He would preach from the prison loud enough so people could hear it over the wall. So they moved him to an interior room, and from that room, he could have lost his joy and had a pity party. Instead, he wrote a book, the second most popular book in all the world, still to this day, except for the Bible, and it was called Pilgrim's Progress. And so he wrote that. So his trials, what did it have an effect of doing? Advancing the gospel, right? In my little world, back in October of '98, myself and two other friends of mine made our way down to Belize. We were going to do some evangelism there. I was going to preach and do a little conference, and then we were going to head to the island, which was my first encounter in Belize. And we were going to head to the islands, which I absolutely love. And we were going to begin some groundwork of much like Paul was doing, of just walking the streets and sharing Christ and helping to establish a church there on that island. Before we ever got to the island, Hurricane Mitch came up. So everything got turned around. So we're having to, and we had some troubles. John, my friend, he had gotten this thing called cardiosis, and so it had like stress around the heart, water kind of thing, and we're taking him to doctors down in Belize, and we're only there for like 10 days. And so that's going on, and then the hurricane came, and so now we spent our days batting down the hatches, so to speak. We're boarding up the church and homes and stuff. I'm actually going outside the ring road in a little car down dirt roads around Belmopan, the capital of Belize, into some villages, Mayans, who are still living, kind of prehistoric in that sense. I mean, they're bathing in the river. There's no water. I mean, there's no electricity, and they're just out there doing their thing. And I'm trying to explain to them, this gringo's trying to go, hey, come with me, get in the car, big hurricane, And anyway, so we're piling everybody in. And I'm getting frustrated. I'm starting to sulk. And I'm like, man, I came down here to do ministry. Now we're going to sit around and wait on a hurricane to come by and kill us maybe. I remember calling Tammy and say, hey, look, I'm not going to be able to get out of here. Might be the last time I hear from you. She was pregnant with Jackson. I said, I love you. So we start doing that. We're sitting around the house. And then a thought hits me. Man, this whole city is swelling because they've closed the islands. So I had a couple of tracks that we had carried back in those days. And some were Spanish and some were English. And John, my buddy, could play guitar. And so Todd, John, and myself went to the bus stop right there in the middle of Belmopan, in the center of the city, where it just takes you to all the areas of the city. And it's just packed. Buses they're coming in. People are coming, in from all the extreme Belize City and all the islands, so I'm helping people with their bags, and I'm if they're speaking Spanish, I'm handing them a Spanish track. If they're speaking English, John's singing. We're drawing a crowd, and I'm thinking, man, this is crazy. I realized God had brought the whole town to us instead of the whole world, and it felt like. And so Belize or Belmopan was swollen in its ranks. So the church became a shelter. And where are you going to go, right, when you have shelter? So they say, hey, we're going to preach. And so I have literally a captive audience. So I'm preaching a psalm that the Lord is ever-present help in time of trouble. And I'm just speaking that. And I give the gospel at the end. It's an English-speaking country, but a lot of Hispanic, a lot of broken English, anyway. So I'm preaching. I give the gospel. And when I ask anybody if they'd like to receive Christ, it felt like half the crowd stood up. I thought, this is my faith. They must not have heard. They must not have understood. So I got the Jamaican guy, the pastor who was Jamaican. I said, hey, why don't you come up, kind of make sense of it. So he shared the gospel. And it was like 3/4 of the people stood up. And I'm standing here amazed at what God has done. And these people, we spent the rest of the time while they were in this captivity, so to speak, of I shouldn't call it captivity. They were in a haven from the hurricane. And we just discipled them. And it was one of the most amazing moments I've had in my life. As I left there, it marked me that man has his plans, but then God always supersedes with his. And so I realized that what felt like a difficulty to me was actually, it advanced the gospel. It's a crazy story when you start thinking about it. Joseph was the same way, right? I mean, he knew where he was going to go. It took him all these terrible circumstances, prison and accusations of rape and all of that to get him to the place that all started because his brother sold him down the river. And so when he gets there, what does he say? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. You see how our circumstances all are dependent on our attitude and whether or not we have sin in our life. His troubles, and this is where we're going to go, and I'm going to leave you alone. His troubles, he says, caused an advance in 2 areas. As a result, he says, I'm going to read verse 12 again. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what had happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. So what's he saying? My whole circumstances thing, I'm so joyful because the gospel is advancing around in the high places of the city, because all these guards were coming in, hearing Christ, hearing Paul talk about it, Christ, and so they would then go tell other people, I mean, this is what this guy's saying. And so whether they were Christ followers or not, the guard were serving as evangelists. It even made its way into Caesar's household, into Nero's, into his very own home, the one who was trying to persecute him and kill him, but can I or can I not, because what's going to happen politically inside his own home, the gospel was going forth. He said, everyone knows about this plight, and they're all asking, who's this man who's speaking of the Messiah? And By the way, who's the Messiah? You see what's happening? His trial, his circumstances causing this. I think this is crazy. Um, Now, then not only did it work outside, but look what else he says in verse 14. And because of these chains, not only is the whole world hearing about the gospel, but most of the brothers and sisters, most of the Christians here, he says, have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. So Paul, he did have church kind of thing. People would come. It says they were free in Acts 28, and when he's talking about when Luke is telling the story about being in prison, in Acts 28, he speaks of the fact that people could come and go, and he would speak the gospel to them. He had the freedom to do that. But you can imagine there were people that would travel by and go, let's go see Paul. And they'd go in and they'd hear it, and he'd preach, and the guards would have to listen to it. But as Paul's preaching, no doubt some of these guards are going, yeah, I listened to it, and here, and here I am, a Christ follower. I mean, you can imagine what all those scenarios that took place. And so the Christians are leaving there going, this is crazy, man. God's blessing Paul in the midst of all his turmoil. And so it says here, and because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord. Why do you think that? Because Paul's going, hey man, I'm trusting the Lord. I don't care about my circumstances. I don't care whether I live or die. We're going to look at that in a couple of days, Tuesday rather, next week. He said, I don't care whether I live or die. So he's just full of joy. And so the other believers going, well, what have I got to worry about? Why am I not joyful? And so it's giving this confidence, and then it was giving a boldness where you see somebody and see God doing something in their life, you go, hey, I want some of that, right? So now they're going, hey, well, let me go share Christ. And so that's what's going on. And Paul is overjoyed with this. You go, well, I didn't see joy anywhere in there. Well, because we didn't read far enough. But the conversation goes all the way down to verse 18. He says, but what does it matter? All of my trials and circumstances. The important thing, verse 18, is that in every way, whether from false motive or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I can't help but be joyful. I can't help but rejoice. I love that. So listen, you and me, before we get out of here, how about your circumstances, right? What's going on in your circumstances? Is your joy shining through your circumstances? Because some of you, maybe you're still locked in your house. You're under lockdown, or maybe you don't have a job, or maybe your business has collapsed through all of this stuff. Maybe you have a virus. I don't know what all's going on, but what's your circumstances? And whatever they are, is your joy shining through? Is your attitude controlled by your joy, or is your attitude being controlled by something else? See, those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Now let me ask you a kind of a different question. Let's look at your posts that you post over the past week. Do you see joy in them? Think about it. Just go back and look at them when we're done here. Do you see joy in those posts? If not, why not? What's going on that you wouldn't be joyful? Jackson came in the other day. He said, hey, some of my friends have been listening to you, Dad. He said, but they think you're too happy in the morning. And I kind of laughed at it at first because I'm kind of that guy. But I just now as I'm looking at this section of the passage, I'm like, well, good. I want people to know that I'm excited about sharing the word about you on the other side of my camera and all that's going on. Let me ask you another question. At your posts, do you see God's sovereignty woven in there anywhere? Do you see where Romans 8:28, all things work together for good, is being woven in your post? If not, why not? And then, do you share God's goodness? Don't you see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living? That's what David said. Surely I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I don't have to wait to heaven to get there. I can see goodness right now. All right, that's the message. And man, I'm so, I know you probably are thinking, man, we're creeping through this book. But isn't it fun? Well, I mean, I'm having fun. I hope you are. Lord bless you. Man, I hope you have a great weekend. Go enjoy it. Don't sit and sulk and all that stuff. Just be joyful, man. Go find some friends to look eyeball to eyeball with, and whatever you have to do, social distancing, to make that happen in your world. But just enjoy this weekend. And I can't wait to see you Monday. Lord bless.